Okay, we're looking at Wilderness Traverse 2014 race course. It's a pretty big effort these guys have for the next 24 hours. We're starting up in Bayfield Inlet, which is on the eastern shore of Georgian Bay. Georgian Bay is a massive bay off the side of Lake Huron, so a massive body of water they're going to be paddling out into, but not too far. You can see there's a big cluster of islands in this inlet. Incredibly tricky navigation. The water level fluctuates on the bay quite a bit, and it hides rocks. It lets them be exposed depending on the water level, and it really makes things confusing when trying to use the map. So we've actually provided the racers with a supplemental map. So here's Bayfield Inlet here with a more accurate, more detailed nautical chart to hopefully help them find checkpoint 1. And checkpoint 1 is going to be on this little island, on this little point in the middle of this cluster of islands. So really going to test their navigation early in this race. The saving grace is it's absolutely beautiful up there. Stunning paddling, islands, it's rocky, really gorgeous blue, crystal clear water. So if they do get lost, at least they'll be in a nice place. So once they get through checkpoint 1, the navigation difficulties actually don't end there. There's another really tricky section coming up. So if they find CP1, they'll know where they are. They'll have an okay time getting up through this channel. But they're actually going up the Nayscoot River outlet. Now, they're going to be paddling upstream, but the current isn't too bad. And it's actually quite tricky going up through here. They're paddling up this bit. This body of water can be hit and miss with lily pads. Right now there's a few sections that are kind of enclosed with lily pads, so they'll have to fight their way through some of that. And then finding this little channel that leads up to the main Nayscoot River is actually quite difficult. It just comes into a little bay that's full of lily pads, and it's hard to find kind of the break in the trees where that little creek starts. It's actually a really good creek. They can paddle right through, but finding that'll be tricky. Once they do make their way up onto the river, it's kind of smooth sailing from there. They just got to grunt out the rest of the paddle. But again, they're in a beautiful watershed. There's lush trees and forest down the whole way, some nice cliffs and things going around. So up the Nayscoot River, checkpoint 2. Again, they're following the Nayscoot River all the way up into 6 Mile Lake. They get a little portage to get into 6 Mile, and then they're heading straight east on this really nice lake. There's kind of steep cliffs in spots, and they're hammering straight down the lake. They're calling for a westerly wind tomorrow, so they might even get a little bit of help paddling down the lake there. So big paddle all the way down Wilson Lake. Then they end up with maybe a kilometer, just over a kilometer portage. So really not too much portaging, which is new for Wilderness Traverse. We've had up to 6 kilometers of portaging in races, but we're going a little bit easy on them since the navigation's so tough. The portaging won't be as bad. But they do have this little grunt up the hill to get to checkpoint 3 TA1 where they'll have to bring their boats up, and then they're transitioning to trekking. The trekking in this area is kind of classic Wilderness Traverse stuff. It's long distances without being on trail, which kind of plays on a lot of people's minds if they haven't been, off trail a lot. A lot of people stick to the trails, and this is real wilderness out here. If they get hurt or something goes wrong, they're on their own for at least, numerous hours before we can get to them. So it's really a full-on trek, and they're going up Dogfish River outlet to start out with. Depending on which way they go, some teams will come from the north and try and swoop down to avoid this low marshy area. Some teams will probably try and, go a little bit more of a southerly route, but again, it's more hilly and there's a lot of bodies of water, so it's tricky. But they'll be all over the place on their way down to checkpoint 4. Checkpoint 4 is pretty remote. We're having our checkpoint staff flown in by float plane to get in there. It's a pretty crazy place to get into, but again, very beautiful, very remote, and there are a few fishing camps on the lake, so that'll be a treat for the checkpoint staff, hopefully. From checkpoint 4, again, they're through the forest for another 3 kilometers before they see a trail. This trail here that comes into Trout Lake is pretty overgrown. They may or may not see it when they cross that trail. And then they get a little bit of reprieve. They'll see, sign of civilization when they cross under this big power line, which is kind of a nice thing for them. They've been in the forest for, 3-4 hours, and okay, we're at a power line, we're still going to see civilization. But then they got to dive right back into the forest again, and it's really hard to go back into the forest when you finally get out to a trail, because it's pretty tough bushwhacking through some of this stuff. Now, with that being said, the forests in this area are really open. The traveling was quite fast when we tested it, so Maybe they won't be as mentally drained as you normally would be bushwhacking through some Ontario forest. So after checkpoint 4, they hit the power line, over to checkpoint 5, Gull Lake, another picturesque campsite, and then it's more bushwhacking to get over to checkpoint 6, TA2. That's actually Rainbow Airways, where they're going to transition to their bikes. And now they've got a pretty wild bike ride back through the town of Ardbeg and over to the power line. Pretty straightforward on roads. The road quickly deteriorates as the further they make their way out. And then they're on a power line trail, and this is really a hallmark of the area. This trail is one of the greatest rides around. It's just lots of open Canadian Shield rock. It twists and winds. There's rocky climbs. There's flat rock, kind of like smooth rock stuff. That's really fun to ride on. And they're going to be going past all these lakes and rivers and creeks. It's just a really remote, beautiful ride down the power line. So a really fun stretch there. Most of the teams will be riding in the dark. So that'll add to the challenge, and hopefully they brought some bright lights because there's some tricky technical riding through there. That'll bring them out to Highway 124. They're getting close to the finish, but we've got another little treat down to the southeast, and they're going to head into the Seguin Conservation Reserve, which is a nice little reserve of some beautiful forests and some big hills. It's kind of flat on the northern part of the course, but once they get down here, they get into some bigger hills and valleys, and by the time they get there, they'll be pretty tired. They'll probably be biking up some of the hills. And that brings them down to Transition Area 3. They'll drop their bikes, and they'll have a trek back up past over the Seguin River. They'll have to do a swim across the river. It's probably about 100 meters, depending on where they decide to climb. Another little checkpoint north of 10, and then they're back to checkpoint 12, which is the same as checkpoint 8 that they checked in earlier on. And again, this will be in the dark for the lead team, so pretty tough trekking. It's going to, decide some things in there because it'll be tough. Trekking at the nighttime is probably the hardest thing in this race. Is definitely trekking at night. Back to TA4, back on the bikes, and then they just got a quick ride to the finish. They're kind of done by the time they get there. They just got to tough it out and ride back over to the finish. So that's the course. The whole thing's about 140 kilometers. We're expecting the first team in maybe 17, 18 hours. And then the rest of the teams have about 30 hours to try and get through the whole thing. So Wilderness Traverse 2014. Boom!